Home Depot and Lowe's are the two largest home improvement stores in the country. Together, they control nearly 80% of the home improvement market, with the rest being controlled by companies like Tractor Supply, Menards, and others. And competition between Home Depot and Lowe's is really heating up, with both of them making huge moves that will impact all of their customers. So what are these moves? What are these changes? Well, let's talk about it. Now, I am a hardware store junkie, and I shop at both the Home Depot and Lowe's, as well as a few other home improvement stores near me. And I have my preferences on what I like, but in a lot of ways, the big box hardware stores are really all the same. They sell a lot of the same products. They really try hard to keep their prices close, especially for commodity items like lumber and sheetrock. So there's not a lot of room to compete on price. Now, I do sometimes come across a deal that I see at one store that maybe is not at the other. In fact, I bought some Baltic birch at Home Depot for a great price a couple years ago when it was even more scarce than it is now. And the price at Lowe's was nearly double for the same stuff. But that kind of disparity is really rare, and often it doesn't last long when it does pop up. Once Lowe's sees that Home Depot's prices are lower, or that they have a sale coming on something, they will do their best to match it. In fact, both Lowe's and Home Depot will do price matching in the store. If you find an advertised price that's lower at one store, they'll usually match it at the others. But they also look at each other's prices and they'll try to match as best they can. And that kind of behavior is not unusual. Online retailers, especially retailers like Amazon, will constantly monitor their competitors' prices and make changes to the price of things almost immediately in order to remain competitive and get more sales. So for Lowe's and the Home Depot, they need to find other ways to differentiate themselves in order to remain competitive. In some cases, it's offering certain products above other products. In other cases, it may be focusing on customer service or modifying the store layout or being in the right location. But that only gets you so far. And both the Home Depot and Lowe's have made some huge moves recently to try to get a competitive edge on the other. Let's talk about Home Depot first. The Home Depot was founded in 1978 in Atlanta by two guys who envisioned a home improvement superstore, which really didn't exist at the time. The company grew quickly and went public in 1981, and by the 1990s, they had stores all across the US, Canada, and Mexico, and had become the largest home improvement retailer in the world. In fact, the Home Depot is such a large company, and it is in so many markets with so many products, that they're really seen as a barometer for the entire economy, the housing market in particular. And a lot of investors look to Home Depot's performance as an indicator of how the entire economy is performing or will be performing in the future. Now, here's the thing about the Home Depot, though. They have basically expanded into almost every market that they can, almost everywhere. They currently have about 2,300 stores, and while they're planning on building 13 more locations in 2025, they can't expand forever. And being a publicly traded company means that they have to be constantly growing. But what can they do when they've basically expanded almost everywhere that they can be? Well, they do acquisitions, which is essentially buying up smaller companies to try to expand their market that way, as opposed to what they call organic growth. And that's exactly what the Home Depot has done. In 2023, they paid $1.4 billion to buy a company called the International Design Group, or IDG. IDG is a company that distributes and fabricates building materials, things like granite and marble and tile and stone, among other things. In a press release at the time of the purchase, Home Depot said this: IDG helps us accelerate our pro-growth opportunity with a successful showroom model, an exceptional sales force, and proven long-term relationships with renovator, remodeler, and residential new construction pros. This acquisition makes sense for them. It expands their operations and will likely give them better access to purchase inventory. In fact, IDG was probably one of their suppliers before they acquired them. Again, this is really the type of thing that Home Depot needs to do if they want to keep growing. What's eventually going to happen is that Home Depot is going to become a conglomerate, or a company that owns a bunch of other companies. In fact, they've made many other acquisitions, including a huge, nearly $20 billion acquisition just recently. But before I get into the details on that, I want to tell you about this video's sponsor, Henson Shaving. Technology and progress are both great things, and we love to see improvements on the things that we use every day, but sometimes we can get a little ahead of ourselves and things can get a little bit ridiculous. In fact, I don't know if you guys remember a few years back when it seemed like every month razor companies were adding more and more blades to their razors, but they didn't seem to work all that much better. Henson razors are different though. They use space-age construction and materials like aluminum, and you can really feel the quality. But there's just one blade. The key, though, is in the rigidity of the blade and the angle, which gives it the optimal cutting surface for a comfortable and healthy shave each time. The razors are designed to last, and the blades themselves only cost about 10 cents each, and they're recyclable, making the Henson Safety Razor a great choice for several reasons, especially with the cost of blade refills with the other guys. And so if you'd like to try it out, go to hensonshaving.com/DIY with Dave and use code DIY with Dave to get 100 free blades with the purchase of a razor. It's a great deal, so please check them out. All right, so as I mentioned, the Home Depot recently completed a purchase of a company called SRS Distribution for $18.25 billion. Now, SRS is a different kind of company. They're essentially a wholesale distribution company that serves construction businesses like roofers, landscapers, and pool contractors. On this purchase, the CEO of Home Depot said this: SRS is an excellent fit for the Home Depot. It's both complementary and additive to our growth. Now, this is an interesting one because it's meant to help accelerate their growth with pro customers. Now, they do market to the DIYer like you and me, but they also try to go after pro customers, which is really the bread and butter for the Home Depot's business model, much more than Lowe's does. And they've actually been really successful in that. And that's one of the reasons why they are the largest home improvement retailer out there. Now, Lowe's is not sitting on their hands though, and they're making some moves of their own in order to compete with the Home Depot. But before I get into the specifics on that, I want to get your input on your opinion between the Home Depot and Lowe's. Which store do you prefer and why? Or are there things about each store that you like or each store that you hate? Perhaps you like neither and you prefer a company like Menards or Ace Hardware or something different. Leave me a comment and let me know your thoughts. I'd love to hear what you have to say. Now, me personally, I have my own preferences on which I like best, and I'm actually working on a video right now to explain the differences between the two and which I think is better. So be sure to subscribe and check that out. But let's get back to Lowe's. So Lowe's is a much smaller retail than the Home Depot. They have about 1,700 stores compared to the Home Depot's 2,300 locations, and their revenue for 2024 was around $84 billion. To Home Depot's $160 billion. Even though they're smaller, they continue to grow and plan to open 10 to 15 new stores in 2025. They're also doing some acquisitions of their own. In April of this year, they purchased a company called Artisan Design Group, or ADG, for $1.3 billion. ADG is a company that provides design, distribution, and installation services for flooring, cabinets, countertops, and other home improvement products, and they're focused on local home builders and property managers. So what does this actually do for Lowe's, and how does this help them to compete with the Home Depot? Well, it does a few things for them. First, it allows them to provide better service to their DIY customers through their network of installers and contractors, but perhaps more importantly, it allows them to get further into the pro market, which is mostly dominated by the Home Depot. What they're really doing is that they're banking on the expansion of the housing market and on home building. And this is what their CEO had to say about the acquisition. With more than 18 million homes needed in the United States by 2033, we expect new home construction will be a major driver of pro-plan spending for the next decade. Our acquisition of ADG allows us to build on our momentum with pro customers. Now, $1.3 billion is a lot of money, and Lowe's is paying for it with cash. The question really becomes whether this is going to pay off. Will this help them tap into the pro market, and will it help them compete with the Home Depot? Will the housing boom that everyone expects to happen actually happen? Only time will tell. Here's the other thing to think about though, and that is that the world is changing, and every day other companies like Amazon and Walmart are encroaching on the home improvement market with tools and supplies, mostly smaller things, of course. But on the other end, there are companies like Builders FirstSource and 84 Lumber that are encroaching on the building materials space, especially with those pro customers. There's a lot of pressure for both Lowe's and the Home Depot to continue to grow and take up as much market share as they can. And I think that these acquisitions are really only the start. We're going to see both Lowe's and the Home Depot buying up other companies, and that'll help them expand their business. If they don't, then they're just not going to be able to grow as much as they could otherwise. And that's really the way that things go in almost any market. In the beginning, there's a lot of players, but over time, through acquisitions and through smaller companies going out of businesses, especially during times of uncertainty or recessions. Competition gets less and less. And I think that the banks are actually a really good example of this. I want you guys, especially if you're older, to think back on the past and think about all the banks that there used to be. Today, there's really only a handful of really large banks. In fact, here's a graph of FDIC insured banks over time. And you can see that since the 1980s, that number has actually dropped by over 70%. And are all of the banks that remain better than their predecessors? What have we lost from all of those banks that have either gone out of business or been bought up? It's a fair question. But here's the thing, big companies can offer a lot. They tend to have better logistics, and they can usually negotiate with their suppliers for better prices. They can employ a ton of people and sometimes can have pretty high salaries for manager level positions. They can provide a benefit for local economies, and they can provide value for customers in a way that's maybe difficult for smaller companies to do. But big companies also have a lot of downsides. They're run by faceless people in suits that tend to be far away from what's really going on the ground. They usually only care about growth and the value of their stock, and sometimes make short-sighted decisions that have negative impacts on communities and people, and sometimes even negative impacts on the long-term growth of the company, just for those short-term gains. Large corporations also get involved in government lobbying and focus on passing legislation that benefits their business and doesn't always benefit society as a whole. And if they get too big, they can become monopolies and set prices to the detriment of all of us. That is, until the government comes in and breaks them up. Now, a great example of what large companies can do on the negative side is Walmart. Walmart expanded a ton, opening up stores all over the country in the 90s and the early 2000s. And they really laid waste to rural American economies. Small towns had all of their shops closed down in some cases, and Walmart became the only game in town. In fact, here's a clip from a documentary that was made in 2005 about how Walmart was damaging small communities.
I have never been in a Walmart store. I never intend to go in a Walmart store. I've never liked their principles. That's not nice to say at all, probably, but I've seen a lot of small communities crucified and forced out, ma and pa operations that have been in business for years that are out on the street. They just had to close their doors just because of one entity. And it appears that that is their intent, to come into a community and force everybody out.
And while their selection may have been better, they may have had things that other stores didn't have. They may have had lower prices than those mom and pop stores. They really kind of destroyed a lot of the character of a lot of those towns, and that's a real loss. And Lowe's and Home Depot have kind of done a similar thing to the mom and pop hardware stores. They've really become a thing of the past. And it gets to the point where, smaller companies just simply are unable to compete with the large corporations. They just can't, beat them at their own game. And at a certain point, it becomes impossible for those small companies to even exist. Now, the question is, do we lose something from that? Or are we okay with the logistics and the prices for these larger companies? And I think the decision that most of us have made clearly by how well these companies do is that we've chosen the large corporations with the lower prices. So now I really want to get your thoughts. What do you guys think about Lowe's and Home Depot? What do you think about the acquisitions that they're taking on? And who do you think is going to see bigger benefits? Do you think that Lowe's is going to be able to encroach on Home Depot's market share? Or do you think that the Home Depot will stay at the top of the heap? Leave me a comment and let me know your thoughts. As always, thank you for watching. If you like this video, please be sure to hit that like button and subscribe, and I'll see you in the next one.